That night in the narrow kitchen, my daughter slapped me and pointed at a man, my real father. The sound of the chair scraping the floor erased the words "Dad" as if a knife had cut through my heart. I didn't argue. I turned on the porch light, straightened the picture frame, opened the yellowed notebook, and recorded every hour, minute, and word, every breath. A line appeared, dry and defiant. I dare to stay until the end. Do you? Are you brave enough to stay and see when the truth is revealed? Will this slap uncover the source of the tragedy? The kitchen wasn't fully lit. Only a small yellow bulb by the sink kept the room from going completely dark. The soup pot sat on a low flame, steam drifting thinly, blending the smell of greens and a little black pepper into a quiet, warm ribbon through a house that had cooled since afternoon. The old German shepherd lay at the man's feet, chin set on its forepaws like a book already opened. Its eyes never left his heels. Every step, every pause, every small movement, it knew a beat ahead. When he passed the table, the tail gave a small wag, a gentle acknowledgement that tonight, two living creatures were still here together. He touched the old glazed cup and, as every evening, set it snugly into the coffee ring that had marked the tabletop for years. That snugness made a very soft click, just enough to say order still held, that any day could be got through if things returned to their places. He propped the spoon against the rim of the pot, avoiding letting metal tap the sides. In this kitchen, silence was treated as something to be kept. The soup's steam skimmed his face, drawing a light blink, leaving a thin, damp line along his cheekbone. Below, the dog rose and lay back down again. A sigh, then stillness, as if giving the sign, "Go on." He opened the cupboard, took down a white glazed bowl with a small chip at the rim, and wiped it with a faded kitchen towel. The repeated, careful gesture was like preparing a seat in a church. On the wall, the round clock beat uneven, loud and soft, now and then rattling like a dry cough. Out on the porch, a brushing gust made the faded painted sign at the gate tremble. The small sounds gathered, warming the kitchen because they fit together, like fingers closing into a hand. He stood still a moment, listening as the soup changed the sound of its boil, bubbles hiding beneath the surface. The dog arched its back, quietly pushing itself up on its forelegs, edging in beside his knee, ears slightly pricked as if straining to hear what no one was saying. He leaned, his thumb gliding between its ears, where the fur used to be dense and was now flecked with gray. In a slow turn, like turning a volume knob to bring the day down to just enough. The dog closed its eyes, its body settling heavier to the floor, accepting the reassurance by becoming 1 degree quieter. He poured boiling water into the cup, letting the tiny crackle of the glaze wake the old coffee smell clinging to the walls. On the table, a few unopened letters lay stacked, the paper corners slightly curled. Holding them was a rusty clip still bearing the sweat marks of hurried hands. He turned the clip off the envelope's edge, like a man borrowing one more breath. Not in a rush to read, he only smoothed the corner, watched his small shadow sway across the envelope's dull sheen, then left it, as if moving a stone to the water's lip without yet the strength to throw it. The dog lifted its head, nostrils taking in the faintest breath, not out of curiosity, but as if asking permission. It needed to know whether anything had changed today, and he answered by touching its neck. The old reply, "Not yet." He laid the wooden spoon across the mouth of the pot to pillow the lid so it wouldn't rattle. There was a silver scratch along the tabletop, running from the chair at the head to the far corner, the trace of many pullings out and pushing in. That streak, in a wordless language, reminded him there are days when a person steps back to keep the peace. He rubbed the mark with his palm, then stopped. Not every trace needs erasing. Some should remain, so we know where we have passed. He carried the bowl of soup over and set it down, turning it so the lamp cast a stripe that fit neatly across the surface. The bowl's mouth sighed warmth, steam vein thin as handwriting. Before sitting, he backed up half a step so as not to tread on the dog's paw. It understood and shifted, leaving just enough room for him to draw out the chair. The scrape of chair on tile was very soft. He sat back straight enough, both hands cupping the coffee cup not yet filled, as if holding a small heart still warm. The dog set its chin again on the top of his foot, where the skin is thin and the pulse lies close, like a cord that ties the heart to the ground. The pot's breath, the clock, the porch wind, the dog's breathing, 4 beats like 4 harmony lines under a night's melody. He poured coffee into the cup. The bitter scent mingled with the soup's richness, making a simple completeness. The cup was set back into the old ring. The familiar fit eased him, like checking the door lock before bed. He blew lightly. The spoon touched the bowl's rim without making a sound. In that quiet emptiness, a small wish sprouted like a new leaf after rain. Let tonight pass gently, with no one called out of their part, no one demanding anything of anyone. The dog shifted. Its tail tapped the floor twice and stopped, the sparing but complete joy of old age. It kept its eyes on his hand as it rose and fell, as if tracking a boat coming into harbor. On the wall, their shadows stretched long and met at the table leg where the cup rested in its proper place. 2 shadows, one tall and one low, breathing in unison, warming the kitchen better than any stove. Outside, the wind gentled. Inside, the soup was ready. He needed only to lift a spoon and let the warmth from the bowl's lip go into him. Slow, sure, like a thank you offered to the faithful creature keeping watch so that small wish could remain whole. Night was not yet deep, but no longer early. On the shelf, the dish towel lay neatly folded, its square edge flush with the wood, the paring knife turned blade in. The salt bottle set the width of 2 fingers away from the pepper jar, small distances that help a house feel at ease. He lowered his gaze, touched the tip of the spoon to the bowl, and heard the thin soup run over metal. The dog lay still, a joint brushing the floor so lightly it seemed to remind him it was here, ready to listen to the night's sounds on his behalf. He took a spoonful, let the warmth run down his throat, and thought no more. He simply let everything return to its place, cup to ring, spoon to tray, back to chair, hand to the dog's head. A day closed with gestures already keyed to one another, like a slow piece of music, gentle enough that no one had to beg anything of anyone. He pulled the chair closer to the table, where the work shirt still held the day's damp. The smells of wood, sweat, and a touch of machine oil clung to the fabric like lingering notes. He turned it inside out. The seam at the armpit was worn, the collar glazed by the long span of time spent bent over at work. He smoothed the body of the shirt over his knee, pressed 2 fingers along the sleeve's edge until the creases agreed to lie flat. Each fold was a bit of self-steadying. Put everything back where it belongs, and the heart will wobble less. The old pay stub, a paper with faded ink, its corner curled like a last-season leaf, he tucked neatly into the inner pocket, a snug fit as if that pocket were made to hold the quiet evidence of a working life. The German shepherd edged in against his calf, its body warm like a small stove. He laid the shirt over the chair back, level with his line of sight, a kind reminder that tomorrow he would have to rise before dawn again. On the table, a brown hardcover notebook lay open, a dulled ribbon between 2 pages as a marker. The paper had yellowed. Along the edges, flecks of old coffee stains dotted like little islands on a quiet map. He took the blunt pencil, shaved it once to bear the dark lead, then set the tip down in Sunday square. His handwriting wasn't beautiful, but it was orderly. Sunday, quiet dinner. When he finished, he kept the pencil at the end of the line and drew a slow breath, as if afraid to break the thin bridge being laid across the week. He stopped his hand. The dog lifted its eyes. His hand lowered, found the center of its chest, where the fur had faded, and stroked along a familiar path. The stroke wasn't to call, wasn't to praise, but like a sealing stamp, a promise given to the one who knew how to keep silence for him. The dog closed its eyes. Its breathing deepened. Its tail tapped the floor twice, then stopped. He spoke with skin and warmth. Peace will have a place in this house. He turned a few old pages, looked at the dense lines of earlier months. numbers, little arrows, circled notes, sometimes a hastily written help on the margin. Since then, many nights, the kitchen had cooled early. He let his finger rest on a line that had been crossed out, as if touching a scar. The pencil turned once between his fingers, then came to rest at the page's edge. No more arrows were needed. From now on, not one more help would be added to this book, not because his heart had run dry, but because this house, with the cup resting within the old coffee ring, with the dog keeping watch underfoot, deserved to stand steady, not yanked out of the warm place by any gust at all. He drew a small note toward him, folded it in half, and slid it under the cover's edge so that quiet dinner showed just enough. The objects around him seemed to breathe with him, too. The wooden spoon leaned against the jar's side. The cupboard door closed tight. The dish towel lay straight. Somewhere he heard a coin roll in a drawer and stop, a rounded sound as if it had come to rest right at the brink. He closed the notebook. The cover met the table with a very soft tick, the knock of a small but clear resolve. The dog pressed its cheek to his ankle, a light touch like a notarized signature for the promise just made. He brought his hand once more to its crown, fingers parting the fur like parting water. Slow, sure. On the wall, the paper calendar showed pencil marks, a slanted stroke through Friday, a circle over Sunday. He looked longer at that circle, imagining a supper with few dishes yet warm enough, perhaps mashed potatoes, a brown piece of meat, and today's soup left over, and above all, the sound of a chair drawn just enough, no one edging ahead of anyone, a tail wagging under the table like a thread stitching the day's hem. He stood up, set the notebook in the second drawer, the drawer he kept for things that required calm before touching. His hand closed the drawer softly without a squeak. The work shirt on the chair back now seemed like a silent shoulder. The old pay stub lay still in the pocket, not to boast, but to remind. Here, everything earned by sweat will remain for the house's quiet, not be knocked awry by sudden demands. Before leaving the table, he straightened the cup, turning the handle a small angle so it faced his right hand, a modest habit only the one who lives here would know. The dog stood and stretched, joints sounding softly like raindrops on a tin roof. Together they turned toward the stove. The flame was low, the soup's steam still fine as a thread of smoke. There were no grand, thunderous vows, only a sparing arrangement, shirt folded neat, pay stub clipped still, notebook closed gently, the word help halted on its old page. The rest he gave over to steadiness, the rhythm of the spoon, the dog's breathing, and the yellow bulb bright enough for a night without incident. For a moment he felt the house grow a little larger, thanks to the space between the things he would no longer carry for others. That space wasn't cold. It was like a path newly opened for a quiet dinner to pour into. He set a hand to his chest and heard his heartbeat shift to the slow step of someone decided. The dog looked at him, a kind of knowing at the corner of its eye that required no explaining. He nodded very slightly, a nod for himself, for the kitchen, for the cup, and for the creature that had stayed through the years when no one else would. Then he switched off one of the bulbs, leaving enough light for the soup, and walked slowly across the room, carrying a small resolve, warm as a palm that has just touched a dog's fur. The pharmacy appeared like a bright box amidst the low buildings of the street, its fluorescent lights humming with a constant white, pallid buzz. The wind carried the scent of mint, rubbing alcohol and thermal paper. The open sign blinked with a slow, steady rhythm. The old shepherd dog walked close to his side, its paws clicking lightly on the concrete, its ears, soft from the sun, twitched slightly each time the sound of the register's clink echoed, metal clinking down sharply, like a pencil drawing a straight line on paper. He stood outside the window, gazing at the rows of medicine like numbers lined up, red discount labels, white bottles with green caps, boxes featuring images of lungs. A small handwritten note was stuck loosely. Blood pressure medicine, generic options available. He turned slightly, his hand reaching into his jacket pocket, his fingers brushing the edge of a thin old receipt, his last paycheck. Inside the pharmacy, the cash drawer slid open, coins clinking together, followed by a clink. The dog's ears twitched again, like it could connect its nerves to the pulse in his wrist. He pushed the door open, the bell chimed lightly, and said nothing. The vinyl floor was clean, the air conditioning pushing the scent of alcohol more strongly. He stood by the vitamin counter, pretending to read the fine print as if it were dust. His eyes kept drifting to the price tag, the numbers tightly packed without any space between them. On the counter was a clear plastic jar with small change, featuring a photo of a smiling child. School glasses fund. Across the room, the receipt printer spat out a strip of paper, buzzing, then clink. The dog stood outside the door, staring through him, as if reading his breath on the glass. Its ears continued to twitch at varying intervals, slight when the consultation desk coughed, stronger when the cash drawer closed, creating a rhythm of the evening's noise. He took a small box of medicine from the shelf, turning it toward the light. The box reflected a thin beam of light on his finger, revealing skin roughened by the cold. He held it longer than necessary, as if weighing it between his palms. The payment was quick. Swipe, beep, clink of coins, clink. He unconsciously tightened his grip on the box, then placed it back in its spot, shifting over to grab a smaller one with a lower dosage. By his side, his pocket was just heavy enough to make a faint clink when he turned, a sound that made the dog outside lift its head, its gaze moving from the door to his hand. On the wall near the counter, a promotional calendar hung crookedly, its staple glinting in the light. He stepped over and lightly adjusted the board, straightening it. The gesture reminded him of how he would adjust the handle of a coffee cup at home. Small things must be in the right place for one to breathe easier. To his left, an elderly woman folded her receipt into her wallet. The wallet's click made the dog's ears twitch again. It took a half step toward the door, its nose pressed against the glass as if offering its warmth, its breath to keep the stillness in the cold air. He gestured by placing the box in a black plastic basket, added a pack of lemon pastilles, then withdrew it and placed it back, his hand hesitant like a bird testing a fragile branch. The change in his pocket he counted from memory, not looking inside. 1, 2. Is it enough? At the counter, the receipt printer interrupted. Clink! The dog's ears twitched, its eyes tilted, waiting for his hand to decide. He lifted the basket, then set it back down. The light overhead reflected on his cheek, showing a faint weariness, like the ring left by dried tea on a kitchen table. He didn't approach the counter immediately. Instead, he took a short circle around the bandage aisle, examining the rolls of white cloth neatly stacked. Above him, the air conditioner switched its fan with a long whoosh. The door clicked shut after another customer, the rubber seals gently kissing the frame with a soft click. He could hear the quiet hum of the small street filtering through the glass, bicycle bells, a mailbox slamming shut, a cat leaping from the trash can tipping with a thunk. All these sounds blended into a background, making the clink of the register like a needle tapping on an empty drum. He walked out, buying nothing but the thin box of medicine. The doorbell chimed again, this time more softly, like a glass tapping a saucer. The dog immediately pressed against his leg. Its tail wagged in a narrow arc, cautiously, like how he had held the basket earlier. He stood beneath the pharmacy awning, pulling out the receipt, its thin paper fluttering in the wind, the numbers in neat rows like trees in a line. The receipt had a smudge of ink on the corner, useless evidence, yet still there. He folded it in thirds, slipping it into the same pocket as the old paycheck, two thin sheets brushing together with a dry sound, just enough for the dog to tilt its head and listen. Across the street, the laundromat released a gust of warm air through its cracked door. The spinning machine hummed a full circle, the red button blinking, the smell of detergent mixing into the air. He looked over, then back at the sparse crowd. The noise of the small street wasn't loud. It was a collection of small, fragmented sounds stitched together. Bells, fans, glass. And with every clink from the pharmacy, the only thing he could hear was the pencil's line closing in the notebook, the old mark where the word save had once been. The dog shifted closer, its shoulder brushing his knee, its warmth spreading out like a thick blanket. They began walking. The road was streaked with the dampness of the evening's rain, the porch lights of the houses casting oval yellow shapes onto the puddles. He walked in rhythm, his hand loosening the leash a little. The dog kept pace, its ears still connected to the city. Each clink behind them, though growing faint, was still recorded with a small tremor, like punctuation for the invisible calculations in his head. Then the sound melted into the wind, leaving only the tap of its nails on the pavement and the steady breathing of two companions following the same rhythm, just steady enough for them to pass the remaining stretch of street without stopping for anything other than the red light and a leaf falling onto the dog's nose. The dog sneezed, looked up at him, and he nodded slightly. No words. Only the small street and the clink that had become a tiny dot at the end of the sentence. The old dining table was a smooth wood surface in the center, scratched lightly on the edges like the fingerprints of time. On it, he spread out thin sheets of paper, electricity and water bills, the porch statement, a pharmacy receipt with numbers that gleamed like the lingering scent of mint still clinging to the paper. The short pencil sat in his palm, its tip darkened as though it had consumed too much charcoal. He moved the pencil back and forth between two columns of numbers, slightly adjusting each digit as if soothing something within his chest that was beating faster than the rhythm of the clock on the wall. The coffee cup sat neatly in its old ring, the warmth already gone, but the bitter scent remained, lingering like a quiet commitment. Beneath the table, the steady breathing of the old shepherd dog slid past the hem of his pants, warm like a heating pad placed just right. He pulled the paper closer to the light, noticing a thin oil stain at the edge, a leftover from yesterday when he changed the porch light bulb but hadn't cleaned it properly. These small marks made the paper feel heavy. Each sheet suddenly became a stone, and when placed down, it carried the weight of his own heart. His fingers trembled when he drew the equal sign. The pencil left a wobbly gray streak, like the distant echo of the clink from the cash register at the pharmacy, still reverberating somewhere. Outside the window, the wind swept through the row of maples, the leaves rubbing together in a dry, sharp sound, similar to the soft flutter of paper receipts. He paused, placing his hand on his knee, and immediately a familiar weight rested on him. The large, soft head of the dog settled perfectly as if this chair had been made for both of them. That touch slowed his heartbeat. He laid the pencil across the sum, his palm opened like a grassy shore. The dog breathed deeply as one who didn't know how to worry, but knew how to stay by the side of worry. Its nose nudged gently against the fabric of his pants, pulling a trail of old cigarette dust he had long since given up, a habit that had gone hand in hand with countless sums. He bent down, running his hand through its neck, the thick gray fur slipping through his fingers, each hair like a thread that synchronized his heartbeat. Near its ear, he heard a faint rumble, not a growl, but a quiet confirmation that a creature trusted his presence. Looking up, he saw the words, "Sunday, peaceful dinner," neatly underlined with a soft pen stroke. Beneath it, a pink eraser was tilted, erasing an incorrect subtraction where gas money had been mistakenly added. He turned the eraser, blowing off the dust like chalk on an old blackboard, leaving a slightly smudged blank space. He filled in the numbers again. The left column was due immediately. The right column was can wait, a longer list, as if everything that could wait had to learn how to be silent. Outside on the porch, the light flickered once and then steadied. In that moment, the kitchen seemed to shrink and expand with the dog's breath. He picked up the cup, the porcelain tapping against the wood with a soft clink, and set it back in its circle. Small details, like the button missing one eye, like the hinge that no longer creaked thanks to the oil from the night before, all gathered together like a thin cloak he draped over his worries. The pencil scratched lightly as it ran across the new numbers. He wrote the date at the margin, the letters neat with no complaints, only the numbers standing side by side in their honesty. The dog shifted its position, its nails tapping lightly on the floor like distant rain. Then it fell silent, its head still resting on his leg, eyes half open like a guard who hasn't fully slept. He silently read each item. without speaking, each one like a step on a staircase leading down to the basement of this month. On the third step, he paused, running his hand down the dog's neck again, the cold in his shoulder bones fading. A crumpled envelope lay at the edge of the table. Inside it, several receipts placed the wrong way. He turned it over, straightening it like someone preparing a seat for another, preparing carefully for things without a person. Papers, envelopes, bullet points was also a way of preserving dignity. He understood this, not in words, but by tying together the scattered things with a thread of patience. The pencil's tip had dulled. He sharpened it, the wood shavings falling into his hand like the fleeting scent of the forest in the kitchen. The blade's edge scraped across the charcoal, leaving a sharp black dot, ready to write again. He tilted the notebook so the light didn't cast a shadow on the right column. The dog, as if understanding, lowered its head even more, still touching him with a new part of its weight. A silver whisker caught on his pants, thin and persistent, making him feel that he too could be as persistent with these numbers. From the small street, a mailbox lid slammed shut, a hollow, distant sound. He paused halfway through the equal sign, his eyes sliding past the window where the sky was tinged with a silent gray streak. There was no letter for him right now, only numbers that needed to be placed in their spots. He returned to the sum, drawing a neat line, then adding, the total appeared neither beautiful nor desperate, just honest. He tapped the pencil lightly against the edge of the table. 1, 2, 3, those taps, a reminder that everything would continue. When he finished the last line, he set the pencil down and laid his flat hand on the paper, feeling its coolness slip through his skin like a clean metal tray. Beneath, the dog breathed deeply. He let his other hand sink into its warm fur. In the kitchen, the clock still ticked beneath the air, filled with the scent of pencil lead and weak coffee. He didn't add the word "save" to the notebook, just the date and a line, to mark that the calculations were done, enough to get through the week, enough to keep the promise at 1 billion still valid in this kitchen. He closed the notebook, sliding it against the wall. The cup still sat in its perfect circle. The light remained steady. The dog looked up, waiting for a small sign, and he gave it that sign, a long stroke from its neck to its chest, a thank you without words. The worry over money was still there, but it had been placed in order. In the darkening kitchen, the peace wasn't the absence of worry, but the knowledge of where to seat that worry. The kitchen still held the scent of pencil and weak coffee, but the air suddenly shifted, as though someone had opened an invisible window somewhere. From the porch, the wind swept across the old doormat, carrying with it an unfamiliar fragrance, sweet and cold, thin like a freshly sharpened knife edge. Immediately after, the rhythmic tap of high heels striking wood. 1, 2, 3, each step like a period hammered into the wooden floor of a house that was accustomed to the soft patter of slippers and the clicking of dogs' nails. The porch light cast a long streak onto the tile floor, cutting across the old coffee ring on the table. His cup slightly shifted out of its mark, like a compass needle nudged by a hand. Before he could adjust it, the sound of heels passed the threshold, leaving behind a trace of rain dust, like salt scattered on the floor. The fragrance of perfume mingled with the familiar smells of the kitchen, the simmering soup, oilwood, papers, and then climbed upward, settling a thin layer of mist against the ceiling. Beneath the table, the old shepherd dog suddenly stopped its steady breathing. It lifted its head, ears standing up like small wings catching a signal, its black eyes reflecting the golden light. Without waiting for a command, it stood up with a smooth, quiet movement, like a coil that had fully wound, then left its spot, walking to the center of the room. The fur along its spine slightly bristled, not aggressively, just like grass bending in the wind. Its tail lowered. Drawing a half arc of caution, the stranger entered, closing the door with a push just firm enough. The door didn't creak. It had been oiled the day before, but the floor tiles responded with a dry crispness beneath the man's heels. His coat was dark like a moving patch of night, carrying the scent of fresh rain and a heavy perfume of orange peel and cedarwood, an unfamiliar fragrance in a kitchen that only knew coffee warmth and the back of a dog. His eyes swept over the table, the chairs, the clock, then paused on him. Even his gaze carried a scent, a faint metallic one like something just unboxed. The dog had positioned itself between the two. It didn't bark. Its body tilted slightly, like a wall holding back the wind. Its nose stretched forward, sniffing the perfume, then recoiling a fraction, eyes never leaving the stranger's every odd movement. Its claws tapped lightly on the floor. Clink, clink, just enough to mark its presence. At the edge of the table, he realized his hand had left the pencil, now resting slowly on the wood, like placing it on a fresh wound. A low hum opened somewhere deep, a growl, faint, like distant thunder, only audible to those close. It emanated from the dog's chest, short and even, not meant to attack, but to establish an invisible boundary. It stepped half a step forward, its shoulder brushing his trouser leg, like reminding him of its position, like driving a wooden stake into the ground to keep the house from drifting in the strange current. The stranger reached out, as if to touch the nearest chair. The sound of leather gloves scratching against wood made an unfamiliar noise in the kitchen, like turning pages in a book that didn't belong on this shelf. The whole room, the cup, the coffee ring, the dish towel hanging close to the stove, seemed to have been rearranged without anyone touching it. A chair slightly displaced, the cupboard's edge slightly ajar, the light overhead casting another shadow into a corner that seldom had one. He suddenly felt his chest lightly constricted, not painful, just tight, like wearing a sweater that didn't quite fit. The dog walked between the two, literally walking between him and the stranger. Its shoulder brushed against his shin, warm like a piece of blanket. It didn't look at him, nor did it fully look at the stranger. It looked at the space between, where a path could either open or close. The growl rose again, very faint, this time with a slight rhythm, like the tick of the wall clock just catching up to a new hour. He inhaled slowly, the scent of the perfume hitting his throat like alcohol, then breaking into a thin streak just behind his nose. His hand, without him realizing when, had rested on the dog's neck. The thick, smooth, warm fur slid through his palm like water through a narrow ditch. He felt its breath reverberate back into his hand, calm, heavy, steady. That sensation pulled him away from the dizziness of smell and sound, placing him back in his chair like one places a porcelain cup back into its old ring. From outside the street, the sudden clink of the cash register at the pharmacy, its sound migrating through the window, touched his spine. The numbers he had just added up in 2B suddenly resurfaced, lined up like fragile steps before the stranger's feet. He noticed more clearly the slight shift of the cup, the gentle slide of the chair, the gap where the cupboard's edge had opened. 3 tiny slips of order. The house, which only needed the dog's breath to keep its rhythm, now had to fight off another scent. The dog stopped, freezing its body like a landmark. It tilted its head, listening. Its tail lowered even more, nearly parallel to the floor. Its shoulders opened slightly, blocking half the view between the two people. The growl softened into a taut thread of sound, tense but not broken. It didn't need to bark. It only needed to stand there like a period placed just right to ensure the story wouldn't be written differently by anyone else. The stranger shifted his heel. The sound of shoes added another sharp, dry beat. He, with the reflex of one who had lived long among fragile things, lightly placed his finger on the back of his chair as if signaling a retreat. The dog glanced up, its black eyes glowing, then shifted its weight toward him halfway, ready to move along. In the middle of the kitchen, the scent of perfume still hung like a cold silk ribbon. The house breathed more shallowly, and in the silent space, like a burnt crust on a loaf of bread, the dog's silent warning, deep, firm, without flair, held tightly to the thin line between the warmth of the kitchen and the strange presence stepping in. He pushed his chair back a notch, the sound of its legs scraping lightly on the tiles, as soft as a breath. The chair had originally faced the stove, where he used to sit with his small notebook and place the cup neatly into the old coffee ring. Now he shifted toward the end of the table, where the overhead light was partially blocked by the refrigerator, leaving a narrow patch of shadow diagonally across his shoulder. His hand automatically brushed the wood, as if seeking a sloped edge. No one spoke. Only a strange coat was now draped over the chair near the window, and the perfume followed, spreading until it reached the spoon tray beside the sink. His cup was still out of place, tilted at a small angle, like a compass needle that had been pulled off course by a passing magnet. He didn't adjust it. He left it as it was, accepting the shift as a new vein of the room. On the wall, the clock ticked past a mark, its ticking tone shifting as it passed through the dark fabric of the coat. A long shadow fell across the table, covering the numbers he'd added in 2B, making the total disappear into a muted brown-gray haze. The dog moved from its spot in the center of the room, turning just enough for its shoulder to slide past his shin. It moved slowly, like a boat grazing the water. Under the table, its body found the narrow space between the chair and the wall, its back flat against the floor, its legs curled in, holding a space just wide enough for an unspoken reassurance. Then its head, heavy and warm, gently nuzzled against his pant leg. That touch had its own language, no urging, no display, just placing him back in his rightful place in the house, like straightening a misaligned picture frame. The stranger shifted his heel. The floor tiles responded with a dry crispness. Another chair was pulled closer to the coffee cup, the sound of its movement louder, clearer, the sound of the center shifting. He realized his chest tightened with the movement of that chair, like a string tightening around the mouth of a cloth bag. He didn't look up. His two fingers merely traced back and forth over the smooth wood grain, past a thin scar from when the cast iron pot had been set down hot years ago. His other hand rested on the dog's neck, buried in the thick gray fur that had started to turn silver, searching for warmth like a small fire stashed away. The dog's breath flowed evenly into his pant leg, syncing with his heartbeat, then slowly lowering that rhythm, like pulling a blanket over the chest. Its nails tapped, then lifted off the floor, clicking lightly like rain chasing the porch, then went quiet. Its tail didn't wag. It lay still, parallel to the floor, a straight line under the assertion. Its eyes looked through the gap between the table legs, at the height of the stranger's pant leg. A silver whisker trembled slightly as the perfumed scent sank lower. Its throat hummed a faint note, not quite a growl, just enough to mark an invisible boundary. He sat lower than usual. From this vantage point, the edge of the table seemed half a hand higher. The side of his chair scraped against a wall with chipped paint, revealing an older, yellower layer beneath. In that lowered position, his back remained straight, a habit left over from years of hauling planks of wood and balancing on unstable ladders. His foot found the dog's body. He twisted his shoe's toe closer, letting the polished leather touch its soft forehead, like signing discreetly the presence of both. Across the table, the sound of a hand brushing against the wood, the leather gloves exhaling a cold breath, a metal spoon gently vibrated in a glass cup, the sound delicate like a shard of glass falling into water. All those sounds connected, forming a melody that pushed others to the edge. He let himself drift along the edge of that melody, but didn't move from the shore. The head resting on his pant leg was an anchor. The smell of the dog's fur, fresh and warm, slipped between the strange perfume, creating just enough air to breathe. He placed both hands on his thighs, his thumb tapping lightly 3 times. The dog responded by shifting half of its weight onto the top of his foot like a quiet harmony. In his mind, the words he had once intended to write, the explanations, the revisions, passed like birds over the rooftop, then vanished. On the table, the pencil he had left there after 2B still lay horizontally, its graphite point facing toward the stranger's new seat like an arrow that hadn't been shot. The kitchen adjusted its order through invisible things. The warmth grew less even, the light less flat, the silence less gentle. But under the table, another order was anchored. The dog's head pressed closer to his pant leg. Feeling the pulse through the thick fabric, it exhaled, long and deep, pushing a bit of cold away. He didn't need to reach out to stop anyone. didn't need to pull the chair closer or farther. The dog's simple, steady behavior had already done the work of a serious statement. This was home, and he was the one sitting in this chair. The clock ticked past another mark. Outside on the porch, the wind swept a dry leaf across the doorstep, caught by the old doormat. In the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed to life, vibrating gently. He lowered his eyelids halfway, listening to the dog's steady breath and the thin rumble in its chest, a background song only the two of them knew. Pushed to the last chair, he still had a place to anchor, and that head pressing against his pant leg, with the slightest of gestures, had confirmed what needed to be confirmed. His position was not determined by the stranger, but by this silent loyalty pointing the way. He pulled the notebook to the center of the table, turning to a blank page. The paper was smooth, and the overhead light made it gleam like a calm surface of water. He didn't write. He only placed the pencil across the edge of the paper, its tip pointing inward like a fish that had just brushed against the shore and stopped. At the edge of the table, his coffee cup was still out of alignment from the old circle it had left earlier. He reached to adjust it, bringing the bottom of the porcelain gently into the faded mark, the soft clink, like a beat, placing the order back into place. Outside on the porch, the wind swept past the light and then stopped. The strange perfume had faded, leaving behind the scent of oil wood, old pencil lead, and the warm smell of dog fur, like wool drying in the sun. The shepherd dog lay right at his feet, its breath steady and puffing like a small bellows. He slid his other hand over its neck, stroking against the grain of its fur, his fingers brushing the thick, smooth coat, feeling the subtle rhythm of a heartbeat hidden under the warmth. That heartbeat slowed his own, no longer rushing as when the chair had been dragged to the center of the room. The pencil stayed still. Its tip touched the grooves of the paper, leaving a faint shadow. He looked at it like one would look at an untraveled path, straight, quiet, promising nothing but the need to take each step. On the edge of the page, a small coffee dust clung, dark as a pinhead. He didn't wipe it off, only tilted the notebook slightly, so the speck nestled into the corner, like placing a small stone on the side of the road. The refrigerator hummed quietly to life. The wall clock ticked past a mark. Somewhere distant, a door shut. These trivial sounds anchored the kitchen back into place. He relaxed his shoulders by a fraction, the dog's head pressed deeper into his pant leg, heavy enough to remind him, there is a body here, motionless because it trusts. He ran his palm along the dog's shoulder blade, hearing a faint growl rise from its throat, not a growl of aggression, but the steady hum of an old loom working evenly. The white page reflected a gentle light back into his eyes. Within that circle, the words he had once wanted to pour out, explanations, justifications, now dissolved into silent marks. He remembered the pencil's line in his ledger, the promise written, no more words like save. That line now felt like a stitch, holding the edge of this white page to the wooden table, binding his heartbeat with the dog's breath. Not writing was also a way to keep a promise, to let the paper speak when needed, not to pour all the chaos onto it. He pushed the pencil a finger's length to the right, aligning it with the top edge of the page. That small alignment brightened the kitchen with a half shade of light. He stroked the dog's neck again, slowly, steadily, like smoothing the wrinkles out of a warm tablecloth. In this downward motion, his heart followed, softening the pulse in his throat. The animal responded by sighing deeply, its tail still, its ears twitching lightly, as if receiving a word not spoken aloud. The file folder sat diagonally across the edge of the table, its plastic edge marked with a faint fingerprint. He didn't open it. He left it there like an observer standing outside, much like the pencil stood outside the words. Silent things know how to hold their place, the porcelain cup perfectly aligned, the file folder resting askew, the pencil lying across the page, his hand on the dog's back. They formed a fragile balance, enough to keep him in his kitchen without being pulled away by the scents or sounds that had entered. From the gap in the window, the faint light of the afternoon slanted across the edge of the paper. The coffee dust in the corner gleamed brown-red, then went still, He touched the pencil to the paper, just touched it without pressing, a dry, small dot, almost invisible. His other hand tilted, his fingertips lightly scraping through the thick fur from the neck down to the chest. He counted 3 strokes, paused, and then 3 more. The strokes were like an invisible ruler, straightening the internal wrinkles. A cartwheel rolled down the street outside. Inside, the dog's breathing was as steady as a distant compressor. He lifted the pencil from the page, returning it to its original place. The page remained white. That whiteness was no longer emptiness, but the space to breathe for the day to come, when he would need to record what needed to be recorded, in the order of evidence, not impulse. He didn't write words, he wrote rhythm. Before closing the notebook, he gently rubbed between the dog's ears, his fingers warming from the fur and the pulse beneath the skin. The animal closed its eyes for a moment, its mouth barely open to take in another breath. He pressed the file folder closer to the edge of the notebook, not opening it, just aligning it straight. The kitchen seemed to breathe with him. When he stood, the cup was still in its original circle, the porch light was still, the pencil still lay across the page, and the dog's back touched his heel like the most certain word of the afternoon. The heart was at peace. What needed to be said, the paper would say when its time came. For now, he stroked once more, letting the silence close on its own. He pulled the file folder closer, the matty plastic edge brushing against his wrist, leaving a faint cold streak. No words were spoken. He simply unclipped it. Each sheet of paper slid into the clear plastic sleeve with a soft rustling sound, like dry leaves sliding past each other. On the cover, he used the broken pencil to draw a small line of writing, the strokes gentle, the date, the time, a short arrow pointing to kitchen. Below the line, he drew an empty square for photo, if needed. Everything was arranged according to the habits of someone living with things that could break. Order first, emotions later. He leaned forward, placing the second sheet into the next sleeve. On the left side of the page, a small yellow scrap of cardboard, neatly torn, was stuck as a bookmark. The yellow tag stood in a column, like steps leading down to the basement of order in a house. He didn't write much, only enough to be understood. Porch, light. Table, cup. Floor, stain. These words closed like the edges of clean fabric, no fraying. In the center of the table, the pencil remained, still aligned with the top edge of the notebook, a fragile thread of balance. He opened the drawer next to the stove, took out a transparent plastic bag with some paper clips and 3 stiff cardboard sheets. At the bottom of the drawer, the dog leash coiled like a leather ring, the worn leather darkened by years of rain and sun. He lifted it up. The metal hook clinked together with a dry, small sound, like something that will be used when presence must speak, not words. He ran his hand down the length of the leash, checking each thick stitch near the hook's joint. A silver thread had frayed into a tiny tuft, which he pinched off and smoothed flat. The scent of old leather rose, mingling with the warmth of the dog's fur and the faint oil on his fingers. The dog lifted its head, ears turned like 2 leaves catching the wind. It didn't fully rise. Its body stayed under his feet, only shifting its weight in a half arc to bring its head closer. He reached out, placing his hand between its neck and shoulders, stroking a long line, feeling the skin move slowly under its fur like the surface of breathing water. It welcomed the touch with a soft exhale, its eyes blinking slowly, dark and deep, offering no questions, only trust. In that gaze, he saw the chair shifted out of place, the strange shadow on the floor tiles, the cup off-center from the old ring, all those small shifts just enough to become evidence without anyone raising their voice. He placed the leash on the table, the handle resting diagonally across the file's edge. The metal hook pointed toward the dog, like a wordless promise. When the time comes, we will go together. He took a cheap, smooth photo envelope from the drawer and placed it beside the folder. Then he picked up the old phone, not opening any apps, just flipping it to the white screen, the light reflecting back to reveal a layer of fine dust around the old coffee ring. He turned it off, placing the phone back on the table, an action of someone who knows they will take a photo when it's needed, but not now. The tile floor near the door held two dry salt marks from the rain, arranged in the shape of a leaf-like footprint. He dipped a corner of a dry cloth into water, placed it lightly on the mark, then lifted it. Without wiping, only testing, the damp streak left on the cloth was enough for him to understand. Later, when the light was better, a photo would reveal more than any story could. He folded the cloth, clipped it to the stiff cardboard, and slid it into the folder like placing a leaf between the pages of a book. Returning to his chair, he sat down and opened the small grid notebook. The rows of numbers from 2B had dried into pencil lead. He added a short line at the bottom. Only 3 characters, 1542. He dotted the pen, then lifted it. Beneath the table, the dog shifted half a step, its head gently touching his knee, as if reminding him that time has its own rhythm. He stroked down again, from the neck to the chest, like smoothing out a wrinkle in a shirt just hung. The heartbeat, after that touch, found its steady pace. The file cover closed, the metal clip securing it. He placed it at the edge of the table, its edge aligned with the wood grain. The leash lay next to it, the handle hanging slightly down, touching the drawer below, a gesture of a hand that had grown tired but still remembered the way. These silent things lined up, the cup aligned with the ring, the pencil across the page, the file folder, the leash, a balance just enough to resist the scents and sounds that had passed through the house. He looked at the dog. It looked back, its gaze steady, black, deep like a well in the yard that never runs dry. In that gaze there was no grand promise, only the habit of staying close, sniffing the wind at the door, lying between strange footsteps and the heart of its owner. He slipped his fingers into the worn leather collar, giving it a gentle tug to test it. The sound of the metal ring clinking together was soft, not harsh. That sound was like the spoon tapping the side of the cup when he stirred his coffee each morning. A normal sound, but when placed right, it becomes a rhythm of protection. Outside on the porch, the light flickered less. The wind passed, leaving behind a necessary calm. He adjusted the chair, offering the dog a more comfortable place to rest its head. His hand continued a steady stroke, not in haste, pressing the warmth of his palm into its back, like small logs feeding a fire. With that gesture, he had signed the arrangement he had just made. When the time comes, the paper will speak its part. The rest, the dog, living proof, will stand there, silently but completely, as it has always done since it entered this kitchen. The dining table had been moved to the center of the room, like a bright island under the overhead light. The tablecloth, with a subtle floral pattern, lay perfectly flat, just enough to keep the edges of the plates from tilting. On the plate, the spoon lay parallel to the fabric's lines, so neatly placed that the quiet of the metal could almost be heard. He sat at the far end, where the light broke across the table and cast a gray streak on the wood. The old coffee cup, still carrying the faint taste of bitterness, was placed slightly off from its familiar ring. The file folder was pressed against the edge of the table, the dog's leash resting against the file's spine, a touch like an unfinished grasp. The door opened. The wind from the porch carried the familiar scent of perfume from the previous evening, the dampness of a dark coat, and the soft tap of shoes on the tile floor. Clack, clack. Just right. The stranger entered first. Right behind him, his daughter in a dark green dress and hurriedly applied lipstick. She set her bag down on the chair, pulled the white napkin up onto her lap. As she sat, her lips brushed lightly against the edge of the glass to test the water, leaving a lipstick mark, then inadvertently adding a pink streak to the napkin's corner, a delicate streak like the sweep of a hand. In that moment, the room seemed to shrink by the width of a finger. No one spoke much, only the sound of a spoon tapping lightly against the plate somewhere, and the refrigerator's hum as it started, its vibration thin and quiet. He tightened his grip on the cup, its cold porcelain sticking to his palm. The dog lay beneath his feet, its head resting against his shoe, occasionally shifting half an inch, as if testing the air. Across the table, the stranger adjusted his cuff, his wrist revealing a gleam from his watch, the second hand moving quickly like a heartbeat that didn't belong in this house. The daughter closed her eyes for a brief moment, then looked up. The words that came from her mouth were short and sharp, like a knife wrapped in paper. "Father, really?" The two words fell between them, striking the spoon, brushing against the file folder, then sliding across the cup that had slipped from its circle. The lipstick mark on the napkin seemed to deepen, glowing pink under the light. In his mind, no words responded, only the slight tightening of his collar and the sound of the clock's second hand passing another mark, like someone tapping their nails on the side of a glass. The next sound wasn't human. It came straight through the air, thick, round, and definite. A bark erupted from the dog's chest. Not long, not sharp, just once, enough to make the napkin on the table flutter, enough for the fine dust on the frame near the kitchen to fall like hidden rain. The bark faded at the tail end, leaving a deep silence like the bottom of a tipped-over cup. In that silence, the dog's eyes, black and bright, were fixed on him, not the stranger, as if someone had called his name without using words. It stood up, all four paws pressed onto the floor, not hurriedly, its broad body blocking the streak of light reflected on the tiles. It didn't look around. It only took one step, then another, until it stood by his elbow. Its nose brushed against the fabric of his sleeve, a slight push, like someone encouraging a door stuck at the second notch to open fully. The touch wasn't painful, but it pierced. He felt that small push travel directly to his shoulder, loosening the stiff muscles from his neck down his back, like a wide-toothed comb gliding through tangled hair. The lipstick-stained napkin still lay on the daughter's lap, the corner sagging slightly. The stranger leaned back, resting his hand on the chair like settling into a well-invited seat. He didn't look over. By habit, his fingers found the dog's back. The fur warmed under his hand, an unspoken warmth. Its breath pressed into his wrist, steady, sure. The file folder at the edge of the table shifted slightly as he touched it, the metal clip responding with a quiet clink, as if a spoon had brushed lightly against the side of a cup in the quiet kitchen. The room, like a stage where the curtain was drawn too quickly, lost the background sound of spoons and plates. The clock still ticked, but its sound sank beneath the dog's breath. He placed the coffee cup back into its old circle on the table, the porcelain bottom finding its familiar place with a soft clink. Then he kept his hand there, letting the force of the dog's nose continue the work it hadn't named yet. Neither resistance nor surrender, just standing upright at the end of the table without leaving his kitchen. A thread of light from the porch slipped through the curtain gap, skimming the edge of the file cover before stopping there. The dog's leash lay half inside, half outside that light, its metal hook casting a small, bright spot like a drop of water. The dog shifted its weight, pressing its nose deeper into his arm. Once more, just enough for the word "father" from earlier, not to drift aimlessly across the room, but to return, finding its place. Here, where the animal's breath and the smell of oilwood had already settled long ago. He took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the dog's fur overwhelm the perfume in the air. What had fallen on the table like pebbles thrown into water now lay still at the bottom. He didn't speak. The words of another had already been enough for the evening. The dog, with a single bark and a steady push of its nose, had carved a path in between, a path of silence with a spine. At the edge of the table, the file folder had aligned with the wood grain. And he, thanks to that small gesture, knew what he would do when it was his turn. But for now, he placed his full hand on its back, letting the silence stand firm, like adding another brick to the foundation of the house. He looked down at the animal touching his arm. In its deep black gaze, there was a still surface of water, just enough to reflect the man sitting at the far end of the table, his back straightened by another half-finger's length. The hum of the refrigerator faded into the background. He placed his other hand on the edge of the file folder at the edge of the table. The metal clip clicked softly like a quiet nod. He opened the file. The papers lay still in the order he had placed them. Porch, light, table, cup, floor, stain. At the very end, between the two layers of plastic, something thinner slipped out from the corner of the file, falling onto the wooden surface with an almost inaudible sound. A photograph. The edges of the photo had curled, the white borders yellowing like the edge of a towel, left out in the sun for too many seasons. The chemical scent of the photo, half a century old, still lingered in the fibers of the paper, a faint, clean tang, like the scent of a day's work completed, but still with enough strength to smile. In the photo, he, younger, wearing a work shirt dusted with wood shavings and oil stains, his cheeks dusted with sunlight. Beside him, the shepherd dog of those days, a dark coat, bright eyes, feet muddy as if it had just crossed the stream behind the workshop. Behind the two figures, man and dog, was the old porch, a round yellow light like the yolk of an egg, the porcelain cup resting exactly in the deeper circle it had left before. Their two faces tilted toward each other, without words. There was no grand meaning there, just a long day completed, and the hand resting on the dog's neck, just like now. He bent forward, picking up the photo with his clean, slow fingers. The kitchen light slid across the surface of the photo, making the dog's eyes in the image flash with a small bright spot, just like the glimmer that had appeared on the metal hook of the leash. Beneath the table, the real dog shifted its head, its ears flapping as if hearing a call from a place with the scent of wet grass and freshly cut wood. He placed the photo on top of the stack of papers, aligning it with the wood grain of the table, his fingers gently holding one corner to keep it flat. Across the table, the lipstick-stained napkin lay at an angle, the pink streak brushing against the green fabric of the man's shirt. The stranger tapped his fingernail on the edge of the chair, leaving the soft, dry sound of a click. All these things seemed to flow out of the frame of the photo, standing in line at the edge, waiting their turn. Within the frame, there remained a truth that needed no explanation. A man and a dog, dirty, tired, but standing side by side. He pushed the file folder toward the inside of the table, leaving the photo at the outer edge as if allowing it to breathe a little longer. His palm rested on the dog's back under the table, repeating the familiar path from neck to chest, the strokes slow and steady. The heartbeat followed, finding a lower pace, the ticking of the clock becoming clear again, no longer drowned by any scent of perfume. He took a deep breath, the warm smell of the dog's fur sliding down his throat like soft wool. No need for many words. He held the photo in his hand for a moment, letting the younger man in, the photo and the older man in the chair merge. Then he propped the photo upright against the file folder, letting it face the kitchen, at the cup aligned in its circle, at the worn leather leash, at the light that no longer flickered, when everything stood still. Only then did he let his voice pass through the air, thin and clear, enough to form a sentence. A father's love is not measured by bills. It is measured by loyalty. The words fell softly like a napkin draped over the table, not covering anyone. The dog, as if understanding, exhaled a long breath, pressing its weight into his foot just a little more, a full stop to the disturbance and a beginning of silence standing firm. The file folder closed, the metal clip securing the photo on top. He ran his finger along the edge of the paper, feeling a smooth ridge, an impression of something past but still leading the way. The coffee cup, which had been out of place for so long, was lifted and placed back into its familiar circle. The small clink echoed like a heartbeat returning to its rhythm. At the end of the table, where people thought they had pushed him to the edge, a new axis had been set by the silent things. The photo, the file folder, the leash, the hand on the dog's back. Morality is not a speech. It is standing beside one's rightful place and letting the loyal things speak in its stead. After his words, the room seemed to draw away its sound, leaving only the faint hum of the refrigerator, blending with the ticking of the wall clock. The overhead light stood still, unwavering. The beam of light fell onto the table, cutting across the file and stopping on the photograph, now propped up like a small canopy. The daughter leaned down. The hem of her dark green dress brushed the edge of the chair, creating a new crease. She extended her hand, not in haste, as if afraid of disturbing some bird resting in the air. Her fingertip touched the white edge of the photograph, the corner rough, cracked, and crinkled, like the edge of an old envelope. She did not lift the photo immediately. First, she gently pressed the bent corner flat with her palm, as one would smooth a tangled lock of hair. As she pressed down, the faint scent of old photo paper rose, slightly sour, clean, like the scent of summer hidden beneath silver ink. She slid her finger from the edge into the dark fur of the dog in the picture, following the path from the back of its neck down to its chest, as if mimicking a gesture she had seen in the present but had never known in the past. At first, slow, then slower still. When her nail reached the dark stain of mud at the dog's paws, her finger paused, a mark of a long day that had ended, then continued. Her eyes never left the photograph. Her pupils widened just a little, as though the room had suddenly expanded, giving room to breathe. The napkin with a lipstick stain still lay diagonally across her lap, the corner of it slipping slightly off her knee, a pink edge touching the light, darkening. She used her other hand to lift the corner of the napkin, folding it neatly into her lap, leaving space around the photograph to remain cleaner. This small action made the sound of the spoon on the table fall silent. The scent of perfume had faded, giving way to the scent of oil wood and a bit of old leather from the leash lying beside the file's edge. The metal hook on the leash reflected a small gleam of light onto the edge of the photo like a lost star, finding its way into the old frame. Under the table, the real-life dog, old and warm, shifted its weight, pressing a little more onto the man's foot. Its tail remained still, parallel to the floor. The tips of its ears twitched very slightly as the air shifted. Its eyes glanced sideways through the gap between the man's arms and the photograph, right into the line of sight of the sentry. Its breath was steady, flowing through the man's pant leg, bridging a thin gap between the reality and the image on paper. The daughter leaned closer. A strand of her hair brushed over her cheek, lightly touching the corner of the photo, leaving a faint shadow like a thread. Her hand, the one that had once pulled the chair too forcefully, now rested on the photograph with the weight of a leaf. She turned the photo a tiny bit, so the round yellow light in the photo's background lined up with the gleam on the leash's hook in real life. Two yellow streaks, two times, closed into a quiet diagonal. She exhaled through her nose a thin breath. The breath blurred the image for a brief moment, then dissolved. When the blur lifted, the smile of the young man in the photo became clearer, the edge of his lips covered in dust, the corners of his eyes etched with wrinkles. A smile from someone tired, but standing next to something trustworthy, without needing to ask. She placed the tip of her finger on the spot where his hand touched the dog's neck. Her finger met a patch of white light at the paper's edge. Between the light and the paper, another bridge was formed. The file remained closed, the clip silent. The pencil lay horizontally, its body parallel to the notebook's edge, like a small boat adrift on a flat surface. The new porcelain cup was placed neatly next to the old coffee ring, the bottom of the cup gently pressing another faint line over the old circle. These things, arranged neatly, not crowded, not overlapping, created a language of household objects that she had long read in a different way. She touched the photograph again, longer this time. Her path ran correctly from the dog's back to the young man's shoulder. Then it stopped there, where two presences met without needing explanation. On her lap, the napkin had stopped fluttering with her breath. The edge of the napkin was smooth. In her eyes, there was a slow glimmer, not of tears filling up, but of something that had just found its way, like the diligent stream finding its way to the old riverbed. Her chair shifted very lightly, half an inch, so her knee would fit closer to the table's edge. The sound of wood scraping the floor was soft. She moved the photo back a little, but still left the dog's feet visible in the light, like a breath's mark. Her fingers never left the surface of the paper. The warmth from her palm seeped into the photo's thin warmth, the small heat of the person sitting. Below, the dog tilted its head, its ears lowered a half-notch as if greeting a signal that was almost invisible. The stranger, at the edge of the scene, remained still. His watch's wrist dropped from the edge of the chair. The second hand still ticked, but its ticking could no longer overpower the sound of the refrigerator and the dog's breath. On the man's side, his hand remained on the dog's back, the stroke steady, meticulous, as if someone were folding a sheet of paper, hoping it would lie flat. He did not say anything further. The words from earlier had placed the necessary brick. For now, he let the empty space do its job. The daughter tilted her head, causing the light to change an angle on her cheek. A small shadow moved away from the corner of her lips, returning the normal color of someone who had just placed something heavy down without wanting to make noise. Her finger left the photograph, then returned, touching the exact spot. Again, like gently knocking on a door just closed, making sure it was shut. As her hand withdrew, her wrist brushed against the leash's hook. The metal made a faint ting, a clean sound, standing firm, enough for the corner of the room to hear. No words were needed. Just a series of light gestures had redistributed the weight in the kitchen. The photo stood at the file's edge, its edge aligned with the wood grain, the leash parallel to the table's edge. And between these straight lines, the faint curve of her hand, just brushing over the photograph's surface, still lingering like an afterthought. On the floor, a silver dog hair fell out, lying straight, catching the light under the lamp. Thin like an unspoken note. Outside, the wind shifted. The light on the porch remained steady. The kitchen regained the flatness of the light, but it was no longer the same light. It had a layer of stillness, the stillness of a gaze that had touched upon a story never known before. At the end of the table, he kept his steady strokes. Under the table, the dog kept its breathing steady. On the other side, the daughter kept her hand on the edge of the wood, so close to the photo that if she reduced the distance, she would touch it. Towards forgiveness here, it wasn't a big step. It was the shared breath of 3 beats, the refrigerator running evenly, the clock slowing down, and the ting of a metal hook still ringing in the air, dust settling. These silent things, along with the warmth of the hand on the photo's surface, formed a small path into the evening. The path narrow enough for no unnecessary words to fall, and wide enough for the photo to stand straight until someone, when they were ready, would place it inside. She looked up from the photo. Her gaze passed over the edge of the file folder, stopping at the leash hook, catching a small spark of light, then moving to meet the dog's black eyes beneath the table. In that moment, the kitchen was filled only with the scent of oil wood, old leather, and the warmth of fur drifting through the fabric of his pants. The dog lifted its ears, its head tilting slightly, as if listening to a call that was unspoken. She pulled her hand from the photo, still holding a trace of the cold of the paper, and placed her palm on the edge of the table, letting her pinky finger extend in a delicate line. The dog stood up. Its paws touched the floor, each step quiet, slipping around the chair legs, passing the corner of the table where its silver whisker had just reflected light. The metal hook on the leash made a soft ting, a sound as clear as a drop of water, then fell silent, leaving a space wide enough for a word to slip through. She looked at the dog, then slowly turned to him. Her lips parted ever so slightly, her throat shifting a beat. "I'm sorry." The 3 words came out thin, but with weight. They didn't fall onto the table like a burden. They found a seat between the photo and the cup that had settled into its circle, then sat still. At the end of the table, he didn't move. His hand remained on the dog's back, like resting it on a small roof. The dog took another step. It raised its head, placing it into her palm, just where the curve of her hand met its broad forehead, as if that hand had been shaped specifically for its head. That weight, warm, sure, spread from the bones of her hand up her arm, causing her shoulder to drop by half an inch, letting out a breath. Its tongue didn't wag. It only exhaled a long, steady breath, the sides of its nose brushing her palm, leaving a thin, warm streak like a water brush. She closed her fingers, cupping the heavy head as if holding a heart that beat slowly. Her fingers traced along the space between its ears, stopping at the hollow spot where the skin was thinner. The dog squinted, its eyelids fluttering once, its tail not wagging, only lowering further, pressing into the hand of the one who had called it by the wrong name. On her lap, the lipstick-stained napkin was folded neatly. The edge of the napkin no longer sagged. He placed the tip of his finger on the dog's spine opposite her hand. The 2 hands met on the same warm body, separated by a thick layer of fur. Through that layer, the heartbeats found each other, not in sync but going in the same direction. The file folder stood upright at the edge of the table, the photo leaning against it, facing the kitchen. The pencil lay across the page like a metronome, keeping the breath from breaking. The clock ticked past another mark. The refrigerator hummed at another level. The stranger at the edge of the room lowered his gaze to check the time, the second hand moving without a sound. On the floor, a silver dog hair fell from her hand, lying flat, catching the light before fading. No one spoke. The three words, "I'm sorry," still lingered, soaking into the wood grain like warm tea spilled and wiped dry. The dog pressed its head deeper, just enough for its nails to slide quietly on the floor. It shifted its weight toward her, its shoulders opening, giving her hand more room to rest. The corner of her mouth trembled, not to cry, just a release of muscle after hours of holding. Her other hand, the one not holding the dog's head, rested on the wood near the photo, the tips of her fingers touching the yellowed border of the aged picture. Her arm, through this double touch, connected the present to the past with a bridge that needed no railing. He nodded slightly, a small tilt, as if confirming that the light had found the right angle. His hand changed the rhythm of its strokes, slow, long, from the neck down to the chest. Once, then stopped, leaving the rest to her hands. The porcelain cup remained aligned in its circle. The leash hook stayed silent. The photo didn't fall. Everything, in that moment, stood in its most natural position. She leaned in a little more, her chin nearly touching the top of the dog's head. Her breath brushed down through its fur, held there, warmed, then slowly drifted away. She closed her eyes for just long enough for a shadow on the wall to shift. When she opened them, her gaze no longer passed through the stranger to find a nod. It went straight to him, stopping there, then returned to the dog, like someone stepping back a step to read the signpost correctly. Outside, the wind had changed direction. The porch light held steady. From the small street, the sound of a cart rolled farther away. Inside the kitchen, only the breath of two beings remained, human and dog, interwoven, one long, one short, finally synchronizing at a moderate pace. She stroked again, this time longer, from the center of its forehead down to where the collar normally rested. Right there, she kept her hand, like signing a silent note. No speech was needed. Forgiveness, if it had a name, passed through with the weight of a head placed in a hand, and the three words already spoken. The file folder still waited for its turn at another hour. For now, the dog had completed its role in loyalty, standing between, connecting two shores, letting the whole kitchen breathe a thin layer. At the end of the table, he kept his back straight. On the table, the photo faced the newly opened light, and in her palm, the dog's quiet weight continued to say what needed no writing. She touched the file folder with the tip of her finger, the cold, soft plastic pressing into her skin, a clean chill that made her wrist halt for a brief moment. The edge of the folder was slightly slick from the oil of his hand, and under the light, the faint smudge stretched into a thin, milky line. The metal clip remained still. It lay silently, like a backbone, keeping the pages aligned. She placed her palm down gently, not to open it, but to feel the weight of the still evidence, like resting her hand on her own chest to hear a familiar heartbeat. Beneath the table, the dog had gotten up quietly. Its forepaws touched the tile with the soft sound of late raindrops. It moved closer, the distance now only the length of a forearm. Its wet nose gently brushed against her wrist, then a quick, neat lick, warm and clean, like a delicate seal of wax. That sensation ran up her arm, causing her shoulder to drop by half an inch. At the corner of her mouth, a small, taut line softened. There was no bark, no wagging tail, just the warmth of the tongue speaking to her, something that words still hadn't found. "I've heard you, and I'm still here." She looked at the dog. Its eyes, black and deep, spoke without inflection, without questioning. In the reflection of its eyes, she saw the cup, perfectly aligned within its coffee ring, and the small spark of light on the leash hook, hanging beside the file folder. She glanced up at him, her gaze brief and direct, touching the fine wrinkle at the corner of his eye before stopping, like someone finding the right street after a detour. His hand remained on the dog's spine, its slow, steady strokes reassuring both the one who stroked and the one being stroked. On her lap, the lipstick-stained napkin was neatly folded, the pink edge tucked inside, as if hiding a small mistake so it could breathe differently. She pulled her hand away from the file, her fingers still carrying the scent of old photo paper and warm dog fur. The clock ticked past another mark. The refrigerator hummed a level lower. The kitchen regained its flat atmosphere, but within that flatness, a new vein had appeared. She stood up. The chair shifted slightly, its wood brushing the tile with a soft sound, no longer the sharp scrape of being dragged. She gripped both sides of the chair, pushing slowly, letting each leg of the chair find its tiny worn mark, those faint squares made by years of pressure on the tile. When the chair was back in its original place, the sound changed. A soft thunk, not a clatter, like a needle slipping into thick fabric. She stepped back half a pace to look. The chair was aligned with the edge of the table, the distance from the chair arm to the cup on the table now exactly the width of her hand. The dog followed closely, its body forming a half circle around her calf, then returning to his side, standing as a narrow connection between the two. It didn't ask for a stroke, it just stood there, its head slightly raised like a punctuation mark placed in the right spot so the sentence could stop folding. She bent down, letting her fingers trace the space between its ears, an action learned from the photo and the present, then stopping at the small hollow, holding for a beat, releasing. The file folder remained at the edge of the table, its plastic edge aligned with the wood grain. The pencil lay across the page, its body catching a thin sliver of light, holding everything in place. The leather leash hung loosely, the metal hook silent. The small spark on it stood still, like a star having found its place in the frame. She didn't touch the leash. She only looked at it for a second, just enough to understand that when the time comes, everything here will speak in a language that doesn't harm anyone too much. She sat back down, testing the chair with her weight. The chair didn't wobble. Her foot unintentionally brushed against a silver dog hair that had fallen. The hair lay flat, reflecting a streak of light before fading. She bent down to pick it up, placing it next to the photo like a note, small enough that anyone who didn't know would mistake it for dust. Her other hand touched the file folder once more, not pressing, just greeting. Outside on the porch, the wind shifted direction. The porch light steadied. From the small street, the sound of a cart moved further away. Inside, the porcelain cup on the table still sat in its circle, but the old ring seemed a little wider now, perhaps because the eyes in the kitchen were no longer strained. At the edge of the room, the stranger stood silent, his posture leaning half a step into his own shadow. He didn't look over. He kept his gaze at the right height, the dog's back, her hand, and the chair that had just returned to its place. Her small actions, touching the file, being licked, adjusting the chair, had pulled the kitchen back onto a different axis without needing to raise her voice. The forgiveness, if it had a name, had passed through like this, like a warm tongue brushing a cold palm, like a chair returning to its worn mark on the floor, like a small nod between two people seen through the eyes of a loyal animal. And in the midst of it all, the heartbeat had stopped stumbling, not because of a grand lesson, but because the silent things had stood in their rightful places, ready for the next quiet step to enter. The camera angle widened. The kitchen appeared as a flat island in the night, the overhead light spreading evenly across the wood surface, softly falling on the chairback that had been returned to its worn mark. Outside on the porch, the light stood still, casting a small yellow circle onto the step that had stopped creaking. A slight breeze filtered in from the narrow street, enough to gently stir the curtain's edge before settling. Inside, the refrigerator hummed faintly. The clock ticked through each mark like adding stitches to the fabric of the night. They sat around the table, the father at the end of the table, his back straight but relaxed, his hand resting on the wood beside the cup that had settled into its old coffee ring, now like a ring holding everything in place. The daughter sat across from him, her chair perfectly aligned with the width of the table, neither too far nor too close. The file folder lay diagonally, the metal clip securely closed. The leather leash hung loosely, its handle brushing against the edge of the drawer, the metal hook silent, its tiny spark on the hook unchanged. The shepherd dog shifted its legs, pressing its body into the space between them, then lowered itself, its head resting on the father's lap. The warm weight settled down like a freshly molded brick, adding weight to the stillness of the kitchen. The dog's silver whiskers brushed lightly against his hand. He responded with a long stroke from the neck down to the chest, the rhythm steady, like smoothing out a tablecloth. Across the table, the daughter placed her hand on the animal's back, her palm touching the thick fur at the small hollow near the shoulder blade, exactly where she had learned to find just that spot during the afternoon. No one spoke. The silence here was not empty. It had substance, the dog's breath passing through his pants, the warmth of the hand sinking into the fur, the smell of oilwood blending with the scent of old leather. The overhead light didn't flicker. On the refrigerator, the sticky note had been replaced by a new one, its corner smoothed flat. The writing was bold enough, the words running straight across the white background. Love doesn't need proof. Those words didn't hang like a slogan. They stood at eye level, reflecting in the glass of the water cup, touching the porcelain of the coffee cup, then resting quietly like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. The daughter tilted her head slightly to read them again, not to memorize, but to let the words pass through her, changing the way she breathed. When she looked up, her gaze stopped at the back of her father's hand resting on the dog's spine. That hand was like a sturdy canopy, able to shield from a passing rain. The wind outside the porch stopped rustling. The step no longer creaked. Inside, the sound of the cup tapping the table softly. He placed the cup back into its circle once again, like signing a simple decision. The dog exhaled, deeply, the breath stretching into a warm, lasting trail. The daughter ran her fingers along the fur, slowly, not halting halfway, like she had during the initial awkwardness. She completed the small journey from the neck down to the chest, then returned, the second stroke slower. The file folder was pushed back by his hand, leaving the table space for things that didn't need to speak. The pencil still lay across the page, its body in line with the wood grain, the light catching a thin thread of reflection down its back. The leather leash still hung, the hook silent. A silver dog hair lay next to the photo, which had now been tucked inside the folder, still holding a tiny gleam like a comma, marking the rhythm of the room. By the window, the curtain stopped moving. The night outside drifted, untouched by the kitchen. From the drying rack, a drop of water fell into the aluminum basin, the sound as thin as a distant bell, then stopped. The daughter withdrew her hand from the dog's back, lightly wiping a strand of fur on her finger, placing it next to the old coffee ring. Such a small gesture, making the ring seem to hold more meaning, no longer just a mark from yesterday, but a way to keep today. The father leaned slightly, not disturbing the dog. He checked the chair legs, touching a tiny worn mark on the floor with his finger as if greeting an old friend. Then he returned to his spot, placing his hand back on the dog's back. The daughter watched the movement, her eyes less strained. The corner of her mouth didn't curve into a smile, but softened, like paper drying after being moistened. On the refrigerator, the new sticky note remained flat. The words "love" preceded proof with a space between them enough to breathe. It didn't erase the receipts, didn't blur the dried ink lines. It just placed them in the right compartments to let the paper speak when needed, while the rest was left to the gestures of proximity. The dog shifted its weight slightly toward the daughter, its shoulder opening just a bit more, giving her hand more space to settle. The camera angle shifted back, the house neatly framed in a golden light, the steps, the porch, the light, the chairs in their proper rows, the table with a cup placed firmly in its circle, the man, the daughter, and the old shepherd dog, 3 straight lines connected by their quiet points of contact. From that, tranquility didn't arrive like a stroke of luck. It stayed like a habit learned through countless small gestures, a neat clink, a stroke in the direction of the fur, a chair returning to its rightful place. The night deepened another notch. The clock passed a mark. No one spoke. No need. In the kitchen, where the silent things had taken their places, the words on the sticky note did their job. And the rest was the steady breath of a loyal animal, its head resting on the father's lap, its back under the daughter's hand, holding the kitchen's breath. Until morning. The dinner arrived like a freshly ironed tablecloth. The overhead light fell gently like dust, highlighting the thin warmth rising from the soup bowl and the soft shadows on the spoon. The father's chair was positioned in the most prominent place, aligned with the edge of the table, the backrest resting perfectly against the old, worn mark on the tile floor. Like a pillar holding the room steady, he sat there, his back straight but relaxed, his hand resting on the wood beside the cup, now settled into its old coffee ring, the circle now resembling a ring that held everything in place. They didn't need to speak. The small sounds did the work of words, the knife tapping the edge of the plate with a soft click, the spoon kissing the bowl with a gentle ting, the fabric napkin being drawn across the table in a smooth line. The daughter looked up, her smile subtle, not overt, just a glimmer in the corner of her eye, like a distant light. The father responded with a slight, slow nod, allowing the smile to settle in its place. Between them were familiar plates of food, neither too much nor too little, placed just within reach of a hand. Beneath the table, the shepherd dog lay outstretched, its front legs crossed, its head turning toward the tip of the father's shoe. Occasionally, it gently wagged its tail, a small breeze along the floor, brushing past the toe of the shoe, just enough to remind them that there was a rhythm of life there, warm and steady. Its breath slipped through the fabric of the pants, carrying with it the scent of clean fur and the fading breeze from the porch. Every time the spoon touched the plate, its ears twitched lightly, then settled again, like a wave hitting the shore and retreating. On the refrigerator, the new note was perfectly flat. The words, "Love doesn't need proof," at eye level, reflecting off the porcelain of the cup and the glass of the picture frame hanging near the kitchen. The phrase didn't intrude on the meal. It stood a step back, providing a backdrop for the stillness of the room. The file folder was angled slightly, the metal clip securely closed, the leather leash draping down, its hook lightly brushing the edge of the drawer. The silent things had completed their work and now sat like polite guests. The father lifted the new cup. The small clink when the cup left the table sounded like a confident heartbeat. The faint scent of coffee was fresh, no longer carrying the remnants of the previous night. The steam left a faint ring on the rim of the cup before dissipating. He set the cup back down, slightly rotating it so the bottom found the old coffee ring, two circles, one faint, one dark, facing each other like two generations understanding what should be kept and what should be let go. The daughter noticed the gesture, looking up, the smile now at the corner of her mouth, so subtle that the light seemed to touch it, the atmosphere layered itself. At the bottom, the warmth from the stove above it, the scent of oilwood. Next, the fresh aroma of coffee and the thinnest layer, the scent of clean fabric from the napkin, each layer placed in the right proportion, none pressing down on the others. The daughter placed a small bite of food on his plate, setting it gently beside his dish, her movement short and neat, her hand keeping its distance but her wrist soft, only found in peaceful evenings. He nodded, using the spoon to scoop half, leaving the other half as space for the plate to breathe. The dog shifted, resting its forehead lightly against the edge of the pant leg, then lay still. Its tail swished again, short and round, like the full stop of a long sentence that had just been finished. Above them, the clock ticked past another mark, the sound of its ticking sinking into the wooden table, then fading, making way for the slow, cooling scent of the soup. Outside, the porch light held steady. The curtain didn't stir. The small street left behind a streak of silence running along the edge of the door. The meal didn't last long. It was just enough for a Sunday evening that had been promised to be quiet. When they set their spoons down, the tablecloth didn't wrinkle. The chair didn't shift. The porcelain cup stood next to the old coffee ring, like a promise that had changed its way of speaking without changing its meaning. The daughter gathered the small crumbs with her fingertips, pushing them onto her plate. The father used a napkin to dab a drop from the edge of his cup. And the dog, neither asking nor demanding, only half opened its eyes to ensure that the two of them were still in their rightful place. Finally, the father placed his palm on the dog's back under the table, and the daughter placed her hand there too, both hands separated by a thick layer of fur, holding steady the rhythm of the breath. His chair, at the most prominent position, didn't proclaim anything. It only did the quiet work of a landmark, keeping balance for the kitchen, the flavors, the gazes. And when he lifted the cup once more, the clink returned, soft and clear like a sign to end the meal. A truly peaceful evening, just warm enough to last through the night. The kitchen remained warm after dinner, like the palm of a hand just laid down. The daughter stood up, opened a small cupboard next to the refrigerator, and took out a brown paper box tied with a thin twine. She placed it gently into her father's hand, light as placing a dry stone at the river's edge. He untied the knot. The fresh scent of leather emerged, clean and warm, blending with the familiar smell of oilwood. Inside was an amber leather collar, the stitching running straight like a firm hand's penmanship. The round, shiny metal hook rested quietly like a drop of sunlight frozen in time. She held the collar, looking up. Her voice was soft, choked but clear, enough to be heard like a spoon lightly touching porcelain. "I understand. Your love doesn't need proof because this dog is living proof." The dog lifted its head, its ears half raised. It moved closer, slipping its head through her hands, allowing the new collar to slip onto its neck like a silent agreement. He tightened the knot just enough. The metal hook clicked together with a clean clink. On the tiled floor, a silver hair, caught at the old collar's spot, fell, laying perfectly straight, catching a small gleam before fading. The daughter ran her fingers over the collar's edge, tracing the stitching, checking each stitch like testing the strength of a newly built bridge. The file folder was pushed deep into the drawer, the metal clip secured. On the refrigerator, the piece of paper with the words written since afternoon remained still. Love doesn't need proof. The new porcelain cup still rested next to the old coffee ring, two circles, one dark, one light, facing each other like two generations finding their place without one overpowering the other. The leather leash hung loosely, its metal hook reflecting a small golden patch of the late afternoon sun outside the porch. He slipped on a thin jacket. The door opened and the scent of the evening town flooded in. Damp grass, warm bread still baking, the distant river breathing softly. The porch light stood still, no flickering. The daughter opened the door for them to pass, her hand instinctively straightening the chair once again, then standing by the door frame, leaning her shoulder against it, watching them go. He held the leash. The dog walked to his left, just like usual. Its steps steady, head held just high enough, the new collar resting around its neck like a thin ring of sunlight. They stepped down the step, now quiet. On the sidewalk, the children's chalk drawings still lingered, star-shaped marks fading. The photo shop sign swayed gently, the chain creaking softly like the tick of an outdoor clock. The river's surface at the end of the street reflected a fading strip of golden light, a streak of light like a freshly sharpened knife's edge without cutting anyone. The bakery closed halfway, a faint trace of cinnamon lingering in the air. On the corner, a street lamp lit early, casting a soft, low light, just enough to see a small dust particle drifting through the air. Unspoken, the sound of the collar's hook gently clinking. Each time the dog shifted its legs was like a comma separating the rhythm, allowing them both to breathe in together. He held the leash longer than usual, half a hand's length. The dog understood, stepping out a little further, its tail swishing lightly, head tilting as it listened to the sound of water hitting the small bridge. His posture was straight, chin raised by habit from years of carrying heavy timber on his shoulders. At the elbow, holding the leash, his pulse slowed, steady like footsteps on cut wood. The town, at dusk, returned everything to its proper place. Shops drew their blinds. Wooden steps fell silent. Pedestrians folded their shadows. No one noticed the two figures walking side by side, an old man and a dog with a new collar, because they walked so quietly, as if the path had belonged to them for a long time. On the dog's neck, a small metal tag engraved with its name brushed the hook each time it pricked its ears. Ting, like a droplet of dew falling into a cup. Passing the post office, he paused for half a second to adjust the collar, running his fingers through the new leather, feeling its firm texture, no resistance. The dog leaned its head into his side, accepting a brief pat. The two shadows stretched across the tiled ground, tinged with the fading sunlight, one shadow solid, the other wide. Where the two met, a dark streak appeared, like a hidden thread sewing the two together. Behind them, at the doorstep, the daughter stood, holding the door frame, her hair catching the last streak of light, which then slid away, leaving her figure still in the frame. They walked to the spot overlooking the river, where the old maple trees lined the path. He stopped, loosely tying the leash to a wooden post, like a habit of someone meticulous. Unnecessary, but it made his heart steady. The dog sat beside him, its tongue softly breathing. The new collar fit snugly, glowing faintly, then sinking into the evening's hue. He placed his hand on its head, stroking a long path from the neck to the chest, a gesture that had passed through an entire day and was now moving on to the next. By the time they turned back, the sky had shifted to purple. At the door, the porch light still cast a small golden circle, just enough to see the hand touching the doorknob. Inside, his chair was exactly where it needed to be. The paper on the refrigerator hadn't moved. He removed the leash and hung it on the hook. The new collar still smelled of leather, wrapping around the dog's neck like a promise without words. The town closed up like a book being turned to the right page. Everything returned to order. The chairs lined up. The porcelain cup settled in its circle, the file folder in the drawer, the leash on the hook, the scent of oilwood under the steady light. Peace didn't come like a miracle. It stayed like a habit formed through enduring small gestures. And love, not loud, simply filled in the remaining gaps. The clean ting of the hook, the steady breathing under the hem of pants, the hand placed on the warm back. Outside on the porch, the wind shifted slowly. Inside, the dog circled the legs of the table, choosing its place to lie down as usual. He gently closed the door, the hinge not creaking. Above, the words on the refrigerator still shone just enough to read without needing to look closely. Love doesn't need proof. Below, the new collar quietly glinted a small dot, proof of a thread that had been tied, strong and gentle. The night closed like a door that had been oiled. The file lay still in the drawer. The new cup rested next to the old coffee ring. The leather collar quietly glimmered with a small dot. On the refrigerator, the words, "Love does not need proof," stood at eye level, like a steady heartbeat. He turned off the stove, pulled the chair closer to the table, and placed his hand on the back of the dog, who was sleeping. A silence with a backbone. Here, revenge is not a loud slam of the table. It is the act of placing everything back in its rightful place, allowing the truth to speak for itself, and letting compassion remain. If you've ever passed through a night like this, when you chose silence over proof, what detail did you cling to in order to stand firm? A cup, a chair, or the name of someone loyal? You can leave just one small thing in the comments, an object, a habit, or simply where you're reading this story. Perhaps those small pieces will stitch together the porch light for someone tonight.